LEO the Orbit War. The Orbit War, orbital reordering, and the ASEAN infrastructure stakes. Satellite communication is entering a transformative era where internet networks are no longer tethered to ground stations or subsea cables, but are ascending to low Earth orbit (LEO). This technology offers speeds and latency comparable to fiber optics, emerging as a new backbone for the world's most unreachable regions, be it remote archipelagos, isolated borders, maritime routes, or disaster zones. However, migrating the digital lifeblood to space is more than a technical leap. It is a shift in the balance of power and governance. As data bypasses borders via orbit, questions of digital sovereignty, national security, and infrastructure control become unprecedentedly complex. The world is hurtling toward an age where connectivity is no longer just a public utility, but a high-stakes strategic asset for the state, the economy, and 21st century security. Orbital realignment and private sector maneuvers in ASEAN. The arrival of Starlink in Southeast Asia, particularly the contrasting cases of Vietnam and Thailand, perfectly mirrors the tension between innovative freedom and national structural security. At the heart of this is the LEO system. Unlike traditional geostationary (GEO) satellites perched at 36,000 kilometers, reports from the International Telecommunication Union (ITU) and the European Space Agency (ESA) confirm that LEO satellites orbit at a mere 160 to 2,000 kilometers. This proximity slashes latency from a half-second typical of GEO systems to just 20 to 50 milliseconds, on par with fiber optics. This enables high-speed digital services, telemedicine, and emergency communications in the most secluded areas. However, the current dominance of a few private giants is merely the first wave of a massive storm. The core issue today transcends brand names. It is about LEO governance. Low Earth orbit is becoming a global commons, akin to the high seas in the 19th century. Yet, the world currently lacks an outer space enclose. Nation-states find themselves in a desperate race to catch up with private corporations that hold the monopoly over resources above the atmosphere. Furthermore, the true battlefield of regulation lies within the International Telecommunication Union (ITU), which has become the ultimate policy bottleneck. Spectrum allocation and orbital rights are finite. Those who first secure these rights and deploy their constellations gain a massive advantage in gatekeeping others. Orbital organization, therefore, is not merely technical, it is global power politics. The maritime ASEAN frontier and the shift in sea power. The most profound impact of LEO players like Starlink is felt not on land borders, but across maritime ASEAN, the vast waters of Indonesia, the Philippines, and East Malaysia. These are regions where subsea cables and fiber optics are prohibitively expensive. LEO does more than change rural lives. It redefines the sea, a space where state power is traditionally at its weakest regarding communication. When fishing vessels, oil rigs, or remote islands connect at high speeds, sovereignty gaps are instantly filled with data. LEO thus becomes a tool for extending maritime governance like never before. The Vietnam model. Strategic regulatory innovation. Vietnam's approach is a strategic masterclass in prioritizing innovative outcomes over traditional security hurdles. The Vietnamese government granted SpaceX a pilot/controlled rollout license, a special policy that temporarily relaxes foreign ownership restrictions for a 5-year window leading to 2030 to 2031. Vietnam did not simply open the floodgates. It excelled at regulatory innovation, creating a controlled sandbox to learn from the technology while safeguarding national interests. Geopolitically, this moves Vietnam closer to the U.S. as a trusted partner, distancing itself from the Chinese supply chain influence where it was often viewed as a proxy for tax evasion. Moreover, in the event of South China Sea disputes, the presence of an LEO network, a high-security asset, increases the geopolitical cost for China, as interfering would mean touching infrastructure in which the U.S. government has deep strategic interests. The dual-use dilemma: civilian service or strategic weapon. The ultimate complexity of LEO satellites lies in their dual-use nature. In peacetime, they are civilian internet providers. In crisis or war, they become strategic communication nerves for the military. The conflict in Ukraine proved that commercial satellites are the backbone for command, drone coordination, and emergency links when ground networks are decimated. This transforms home internet into a national security asset that no state can treat as a mere business. Structural competition and invisible digital sovereignty. The world is facing a standards war. Nations that accept a purely private, externally controlled service aren't just buying internet. They're allowing the standards of the new century to be set outside their borders. Data sovereignty is the primary stake. While normal internet flows through domestic gateways that a state can monitor, LEO data can leap from space to a foreign ground station instantly. This creates a governance void. Telecommunications laws were designed for physical towers and cables on sovereign soil. Who is the police in space? How does a state maintain authority when its most vital infrastructure isn't on its land? The sharpest point of this debate is kill-switch sovereignty. If the last century feared the cutting of subsea cables, this century fears being logged out of the world. If a nation's core communication falls to a foreign firm using software the state cannot control, what remains of its sovereignty when a private executive can disconnect an entire country in a heartbeat? Connectivity insurance and disaster resilience. In a volatile world of extreme climate events and cyber attacks, LEO players aren't just selling internet, they're selling connectivity insurance. LEO becomes the final lifeline when terrestrial cables are severed. This is vital for governments and businesses that cannot afford a single second of downtime. An independent satellite system ensures the digital blood keeps pumping, regardless of the crisis on the ground. The Thai model, protecting the national backbone. In contrast, Thailand has adopted a cautious, state-led model, prioritizing regulatory security. Current laws require network licensees to be Thai entities. Facing the rise of gray market satellite use along borders, a major cybersecurity concern, the Thai government has chosen to support NT, National Telecom, the state giant formed from the merger of TOT and CAT. NT's partnership with OneWeb, Eutelsat OneWeb, represents a different philosophy. Unlike Starlink's direct-to-consumer, B2C, model, OneWeb is B2B/B2G, selling wholesale capacity to the state and enterprises. By establishing the SNP gateway at the Sirindhorn satellite station in Ubon Ratchathani, the Thai state keeps its hand on the steering wheel. Controlling the gateway is the ultimate leverage to ensure communications sovereignty remains under Thai law. The orbit economy and the bypass effect. What is forming is not just a market, but an orbit economy. Low Earth orbit is becoming high-value real estate, much like the maritime trade routes of old. Those who occupy this space first define the standards, the costs, and the rules of access. For the state, the hesitation toward private giants is also a question of political economy. Telecom is traditionally a system of concessions and rents for the state. A direct-to-consumer bypass removes the state from the revenue chain. This isn't just business disruption. It is the erosion of a state's financial and regulatory equilibrium. We are entering an era where national infrastructure is driven by private entities moving faster than the law. Orbital congestion and the Kessler risk. Space is not an infinite void. Tens of thousands of satellites are creating orbit choke points and the risk of space debris. Even a tiny fragment traveling at high speed can destroy a satellite. If a chain reaction, the Kessler syndrome, occurs, certain orbital layers could become unusable for generations. The solution to connectivity brings with it environmental fragility and long-term systemic risk. Orbit alliances, the lock-in effect. We are seeing the rise of orbit alliances through a three-tier lock-in. Infrastructure lock-in. Once a country invests in a specific gateway, SNP, switching is prohibitively expensive. Standards lock-in. Protocols and encryptions are set by the owner, forcing the state to accept rules they didn't write. Political lock-in. In crises, the state is inevitably pulled into the block of its technology provider. With China's Guoang project pushing a parallel infrastructure, ASEAN is becoming an ASEAN patchwork, a fragmented landscape of orbital models. Vietnam tests the open waters, Thailand anchors to state-controlled gateways, Indonesia enforces local partnerships, while the Philippines opens up fastest. ASEAN is no longer a single-rule region. Conclusion: the infrastructure of the AI era. In the long run, LEO is the neural system of the AI economy. AI requires real-time, uninterrupted data flows for smart logistics, digital finance, and network-centric defense. Controlling the satellites overhead is the 21st century equivalent of controlling the ports and trade routes of the 19th. The real losers in this war might not be the incumbent telcos being bypassed, but small states with no bargaining power and citizens in autocracies where LEO could become a borderless surveillance layer. The choice between Vietnam's speed of development, at the cost of digital sovereignty, and Thailand's systemic security, at the cost of innovation speed, defines the new geography of power. In the 20th century, the state controlled the blood vessels of data through ground stations and cables. In the 21st, that sovereignty is moving to the stars. Whoever owns the orbit owns the future of the nation-state.